Okay, the background that you need to know. The after treatment pieces you're going to be looking at are out of a ISX-871, a 2007 engine. The engine is actually at our shop to be rebuilt, so it's not running very efficiently. It's got and had some problems. So when we look at these pieces you're looking at, there's a lot of things wrong with them, and part of the reason is because the engine had some problems. So let's take a look. On the 871 engine, there's always 4 sections to the after treatment. Over on the right, number 1 is the inlet. Number 2 is the DOC catalyst that makes the heat. That's its primary job. Number 3 is the particulate filter. Its primary job is to catch the soot and provide a place for it to be burned into a gas. And number 4 is the outlet can where the heat goes and then out to the stacks. You've got 3 temperature sensors always. The inlet, which is A, you can't see it, it's in the back on the inlet flange. B is the outlet of the catalyst. On this particular one, there's no temperature sensor on the filter C, but there's one on the outlet, which is section 4. So the filter's job is to catch soot and provide a place for it to be burned to a gas. The catalyst, number 2, or DOC, diesel oxidation catalyst, its job is to make heat, enough heat to get the soot in the filter hot enough to burn. Notice that section 1 has a screen in it with a bunch of holes in it. That's there to make sure that the heat coming in is evenly dispersed over the entire area of section B. Notice that the outlet can, number 4, doesn't have a grid in it because it doesn't need to have one. Between the turbo outlet and the after treatment inlet, in the pipe, usually down in the frame by the side of the engine, is this flex joint. The flex joints are like a stainless steel accordion. Different manufacturers make the pipe. Some of them look like woven stainless steel, and you can't see the bellows, the steel bellows inside, but they all have the bellows. And its job is to allow for heat expansion and movement. Solid pipes would crack and the gaskets would start leaking. These have gaskets that completely seal these joints. The flex joint is absolutely necessary. Sometimes that pipe will crack, and when it's regenning, in a stationary regen, if you open the hood, you'll see smoke coming out of it. We'll talk about that in another video. Here's a close-up of what I talked about before. This is the inlet section that comes from the turbo. And you see number 1, that's the first temperature sensor. And the 3 temperature sensors have to meet a minimum temperature before the system will dose fuel for a stationary regen. We'll talk about that in a future video. But that's temperature sensor number 1, and it measures the temperature coming right out of the turbo. That temperature has to be able to preheat the DOC and the DPF so that the system will allow fuel to be dosed down there. It has to know the fuel can be burned. Fuel is dosed just to make heat. Number 2 is the inlet. It kind of looks like a plate with holes in it. Its job is to disperse that heat we talked about evenly throughout the catalyst, the DOC catalyst, so that it heats evenly. This is the outlet of the catalyst. So we just looked at the inlet housing that had the waffle plate in it, and now we're looking at the outlet of the catalyst, which bolts tight to that inlet housing. So this side that you're looking at would not be against the inlet, it would be away from it. And it's significant that the temperature sensor goes in about 2 inches. All 3 of them do. Generally, they're pretty much in a line, but they don't have to be. It's significant that that only goes in 2 inches because if the engine runs dirty and the catalyst or the DOC catalyst soots from the carbon particles, it'll always start sooting on the outside edges and work its way towards the center. Once it soots past 2 inches in, and it'll look like a ring of solid soot over it, once it soots, the hot air can't get over that. And that's when you'll start to log those catalyst-faced plugged fault codes. So now you understand why that happens. And when that happens, the system will not allow you to do a stationary regen if that code's active, and it will not allow the truck to regen while you're driving down the road. And the reason why is it doesn't know what's happening inside the aftertreatment sections, and it's trying to protect the aftertreatment from being melted. So number 1 is the temperature sensor. Number 2 is a hole where a stainless steel tube goes in. It kind of looks like a soda straw, goes about halfway in, and that is one of the tubes that the diesel particulate filter pressure sensor uses to measure how plugged up or not plugged up the diesel particulate filter is. And so this tube would be the before filter, and there's another tube on the other side that's after the filter, and the differential pressure between those two are the numbers that the system looks at to decide how plugged the filter is, if it needs a regen, if it doesn't, if it needs to log fault codes, if it doesn't. Because remember, the diesel particulate filter's job is to catch and fill up with soot, and when it gets to a certain place, it's got to burn out or it'll completely plug the exhaust system. So that burning out is called regeneration. The soot is regenerated from soot into a gas and heat. This is our after-treatment outlet, and you notice here, number 1, that's a yellow chalk line we drew down. It's actually a paint stick line. We drew that line across the entire length of the after-treatment before we ever took it apart. Because if you don't line these sections back up exactly when you put it all together, then things just don't go very well. Pipes don't line up, harnesses don't line up, steps don't want to go back on. So it's critical to draw that line across the entire assembly. That's what that yellow line is. Not that important in this video. We'll talk about it more in another. So number 2 is the number 3 or outlet temperature sensor. And that sensor tells the ECM how hot the DPF got when it burned the soot. And it needs to know that because it has to control how hot that DPF gets if it's really loaded up with soot, because it can melt and it can crack. This one happened to be cracked. I've got pictures in a later video of one that actually melted. Number 3 is the sensing tube on the post or outlet side of the diesel particulate filter. So you had one sensing tube at the catalyst, which is the inlet side of the filter. The out of the catalyst is into the filter. And then you go through the filter, and when you come out of the filter, you go into this outlet can, and number 3 is where the other sensing tube goes in. So that's where you're measuring your differential pressure across the two. And then the flange you see on the short extension pipe, that would go up to the muffler going out up the side of the cab or down out the back, whatever the case may be on your unit. In this photo, we're taking a close-up look at the diesel oxidation catalyst. Now I've got a full-size flashlight behind it, and we're looking at the other side of the catalyst, so the light that you're seeing is going through the catalyst. The diesel oxidation catalyst is a straight through honeycomb type material. You can hold it up. If you took a new one and held it up to the sunlight, you'd be able to see light all the way through it. You see the small little, what look like little black pluses on there? Those are cells that are plugged up with soot in this diesel oxidation catalyst. So depending on how poorly the engine was running or if the turbo had a problem, when you pull this out, it might be just caked with black layers of soot. And what you do is you have to clean that out. You can use shop air and blow right through that element. You just start at the outside and go in circled rings all the way around, and you'll blow all that soot out of there. It doesn't have to be washed or cleaned. You just blow the soot out. It's just important that you take a light and go around, especially the outside edges, and make sure you can see light through it. You don't have to have every hole cleaned out, but you got to have the most of them, and you want all that garbage off of the face, that piled up soot on the inlet. If it wasn't running properly, that'll build up. And you can use a soft brush to brush it if it's stubborn, to get it off. So this is the catalyst. That's what you should be seeing when you look through it with a light. Now, the next picture you're looking at, this is the diesel particulate filter. I've got my flashlight on one side and I'm on the opposite side looking through it. See the light? I should see no light ever when I look through it. The reason that you see light through this is because it is really failed severely. And there are cracks all the way through it because it was severely overheated, because it was overloaded with soot many times. And when it got to the place where it was hot enough to regen, it had what we call thermal runaway. So if we were to saw this open, odds are in the center there'd be a ball of molten glass. And the outside edges look pretty good, but this thing is destroyed inside, so there's no saving it, and we're going to end up installing a new one. So again, you shouldn't see any light through this filter if it's in good shape. This next photo is actually the face, when we backed up, of the diesel particulate filter that you just saw in the previous slide. And if you see the red rectangle that I drew there, notice in the center that it kind of looks like someone almost took a number 2 pencil and drew a very faint straight line. Well, that's what a crack looks like to the eye. So this thing, as soon as you see that crack, Cummins would say it's failed. Now, we're going to look at some other things on here. You see the brown stains up at about 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Those are heat burns from when they welded that insert in the can. That is not a problem at all and is not a reason to change this. So if you see those heat stains around the edges, don't worry about it. You'll see those on brand new ones sometimes. Again, not a problem. Now, you see the staining in it. It's kind of got big black rings and circles in it. You should never see that. You see up around 130, right by that brown stain, how it's nice and white there in a very small area. The whole filter should look like that on the outlet side. All those dark rings that you see are because the filter's cracked inside, and those are soot stains, soot that actually made it all the way out the other side and never should have. This filter also had antifreeze in it at one time, and I can tell that because the big soot stain on the right, it kind of looks like there's clouds in it, almost like layers of clouds. That's from coolant. So this probably had an EGR cooler failure on it at some time. Those play havoc with them also. So this diesel particulate filter is junk. and we're going to be installing a new one. So here we are, our last slide in this first part, and this is the new diesel particulate filter as it's bolted in to an after treatment assembly. Now, in this particular picture, this is not the after treatment that we had apart because we don't have those parts yet. This was an earlier one. So you'll notice that the bungs for the temperature sensor and the sensing tube are actually in the diesel particulate filter. Those bungs can be in the housings, in the DOC catalyst, or in the filter housing. It just depends on the part number of the after treatment. Why they do that, I don't know, but they do. So that's why there's so many different part numbers. It's one of the reasons. But you can see in this picture there's two big clamps. Those are the body clamps that hold all these pieces together. There are gaskets between them. They almost look like the old thick header gaskets you used to have on the cars if you ever drag raced or put headers on your car. So all these pieces are sealed with gasket up to the outlet on the 871. And you can see the yellow line that's drawn on there on the bottom left. And actually on the other side of this that you can't see is a chalk line going from the top to the bottom. Because if you don't line these back up, you'll pay for it when you try to put it in and get everything bolted in and mounted. It's really got to be pretty close. So remember to draw that line. Okay, that's section 1. And we'll move into section 2 where we talk a little more in depth about these parts and pieces and what you need to know about them. See you next time on Neural Splendor.